And then, at the end, like for me personally, I try to create, something big at the end that's challenging. Um, and, you know, this was, this was at a time where people had already played Doom. So, the levels obviously are going to be a little more difficult, right? So, so having like a boss at the end was a little bit more common. At that point in time, it was just kind of a thing like, yeah, let's make this a little hard. Um, it wasn't necessarily like a conscious design decision because we knew that it was going to be the end of the final level.
Hmm. Did it give you a whole new appreciation for what some of those other designers did, from like Sandy Peterson and John Romero and American McGee, those guys? Like, were you like, oh my gosh, this is way harder than I thought it would be?
No, I mean, I tried to make levels for the first few episodes. I knew it was hard. I knew it was difficult. So, just like the, from my first attempts at the first episodes of Doom to my last attempts, a lot of it was just kind of like watching what those guys were doing and just kind of making smart decisions based off of the foundation that those guys had already made. But I mean, I knew from the first time you sit down with the editor and you start with a blank screen, at least for me, it's kind of like, oh yeah, this is hard. Like, okay, here's nothing, make something fun, right? So yeah, I mean, I kind of knew from the beginning that it was a difficult task and what those guys were. Plus, I was housed in the same room. Like American and I shared an office for a while. I was doing stuff. And, actually, during some of the ports too, John and I were in the same office, so it's like watching those guys do it and watching just kind of how involved they are when they're actually making the levels. It's like, yeah, these guys are like craftsmen.
What's the number one thing you think you learned from John Romero?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't necessarily know that there was one thing I learned from John. I would have to say, like, John's, in my opinion, John's kind of most redeeming quality is his resilience. This even, this kind of goes beyond just like working for or anything like that. Just like, as a human, John is a really human guy, right? All throughout id Software, working with John at Ion. All during that time, there was so much stuff that went on at Ion. With drama and teams quitting and all these things happening. Like, John never lost sight of kind of what the goal was. And yet he also never lost his positive attitude. Like, he's, kind of he's one of the most positive people I've ever met, right? Like, he's, when things are going bad, he's just kind of like, he ignores the drama. He doesn't engage in that stuff. He just kind of like focuses on getting whatever project he's working on done. Like, what's the problem in front of me? And he never really let just kind of all the outside drama deter. He's just always remained like a super positive guy. Not only in work related stuff, but just like life in general, I'm in the middle of reading Doom Guy right now.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting to see because I knew a lot of that stuff, but we only ever skimmed the surface. But you know, just to kind of see like all the stuff that he's doing, how he's making positivity it's pretty admirable.
I find that stuff quite infectious, like positive people.
Yeah.
Very positive, and I think it's really important in a team environment.
Yeah.
If you have a leader that's like that.
Yeah.
Because then you notice it when they leave. You're like, oh, really?
Yeah. Yeah,
really
that was
the morale.
It was, you know, that was kind of like one of the things when we were at ID. Romero is like super fun guy, and he's also productive. But then when he left, you know, the next personality was John Carmack, who's this, you know, very serious guy. He's got a work ethic that nobody can match. So for me, when John left, it kind of left a big hole. It did, and it was, yeah, it was kind of like, you know, I felt it was time for me to go, and you know, luckily, John gave me a place to go. You know, not that there's anything wrong with, you know, Carmack's work. Obviously, it's, you know, been this amazing thing and kind of
it's like yin and yang. I kind of feel like John Romero and John Carmack, like they brought the best out of each other because they were opposites, and they had the different strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah. And like you know, to this day, I've never worked on a team that worked so well together. You know, I think, you know, when John left, it was really unfortunate because, you know, the chemistry that those guys had and their ability to work and get something done so quickly, you know, to me, that was my first experience, so I just thought that's the way it was. Right?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Like going to other companies, you know, it was just not like that.
So you started to appreciate it more as time went on.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because I suppose you don't know what you don't know, so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so your first main gig, you're with Ed and with John, and then you go off somewhere else, and then you end up appreciating what you had.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah.
Yes.
It goes to show how important the morale of a team is, and how they really need to be a cohesive unit, but then the leader does have a ripple effect on the entire team.
It does, but honestly, you know, the thing that was unique about ID was there wasn't really a leader. You know, all those guys worked really well together as peers and equals, and I think it was just a unique situation because at that time, you know, Adrian and Kevin, you know, were working on their specific part. John Romero was working on coding, utilities, and level design. John Carmack was working on technology. American was working on levels. Sandy was working on levels. Tom was working on design. So everybody kind of had their own set of tasks they had ownership over, right? And the communication was good. So it was really, you know, just kind of this free-flowing, creative environment where nobody really stepped on anybody else's toes. And I think because of that, you know, they were able to get a lot of stuff done very efficiently. You know, everybody had their own thing that they owned.
Do you think that has something to do with the fact that it was a small team as well? Because obviously when a team starts to balloon, then you typically need someone to kind of manage the structure, so communication doesn't get lost.
Yeah, and that's, you know, and that's specifically why I mentioned the communication. It's pretty good. I mean, you know, these guys are in offices right next to each other. Carmack and Romero were right next to each other. test something correct. Romero would just walk 10 feet and the other one smash it out. It's running a company is one of these funny things. Like as you get more people, you need more management. But then as you have more management, things get more convoluted in more different ways. We're at a point now where a lot of these managers and it's just kind of
Yeah.
like I think there's a better way, but it's hard. It's also hard too because on the other side, the scope of these projects that are being done today are so much larger. I think Doom was like a 9-month project, which is just ridiculous if you think about it.
And how many of you were there? We're many. How big was the team?
Yeah, so it was Kevin, Adrian, Tom, Sandy, John, American. So it's like 7 people.
Which is unbelievable in this day and age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Just wouldn't happen unless it was an indie studio.
yeah, but I mean, like, Carmack's a monster. Like, you look at how quickly he was developing tech, and like, looking back on it now, knowing exactly what was involved. I mean, when we came up with, John came up with the BSP feasibility solution. It was like did that over a weekend. He rewrote the entire feasibility solution. So John's always had, John Carmack has always had like a real clear vision of like what possibilities were available, in terms of like solutions for problems and things like that, and how those could potentially be integrated. And he was always just really quick, to get an idea.
Isn't he a bit of a workaholic though as well? Like just in it all the time. I mean, that's my understanding of it. But
yeah, it's kind of funny. Because the whole workaholic thing, that kind of like that kind of gets grouped in with like crunch and all that other stuff. But
I think that they are. I suppose that line can work. But
the funny thing is like the thing that I always notice about the hours that you're working is like the circumstances under which you are having to work those hours. If you're driven, you're in a really creative place. I count code as a creative thing. So like when you're really driven and you're in this really creative place, and you've got kind of a closed the hours pass by much easier, right? And even a lot of times without intent, right?
oh yeah, so it's self-inflicted.
Yeah, it is self-inflicting, but at that point, it's not really detrimental because the psychological aspect of it, it's not negative because it's not being forced upon you, right? You're doing it kind of your own drive, right? Like you got this thing, you got this idea, you want to get it done. So, the psychological and the stressful impact of this is much less than, for example, if your manager tells you, hey, team A is working crunch, so you're working crunch.
Right? Yeah, totally.
So, but he does work a lot. He does work a lot. I don't know if maybe a workaholic, you could say that, but yeah, he works a lot. But I think it's just because he's a really driven guy. He's got an idea about something. He's just very quick and very diligent about putting it out there and implementing it, and just kind of getting it out into reality.
But these high-level success stories, in regards to anyone, it usually comes with some level of sacrifice, right?
Sure.
And John Carmack
of
is
course.
John Carmack because of what he's
Yeah.
done to become John Carmack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everything in life is an exchange, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. For him, I think he had all this inertia early on in his life, and during that time, all this technology and development, right? So he he focused on those things early on in life, and then later on in life. So he's been able to, he got married and has had a family and raised a family and all those sort of things. But that happened like much later in life, right? So early on, he had the time to where he didn't affect anybody externally to him, right? So he could find himself, he could do those kinds of things, because he was driven and because it was something that he desired to write all those things. The mental impact probably wasn't.
Well, as you mentioned before, if it's self-inflicted and you're doing it on your own accord, I think it is different from a manager being like, you have to work 110 hours a week, whatever. Yeah. And you mentioned time, but I think a big thing for programmers is time, and programmers, I would think, have a period where they kind of get in the zone.
Yeah.
You have to get into a bit of a zone, and then when you're in the zone, you want to make sure that you stay in the zone, and time's just not even a thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Do you recall, like, what's the longest period you kind of got into a zone and then lost track of time?
Like, yeah, I mean, that happened pretty frequently, unless it is more, I got into engineering with that. Definitely had a lot of those moments at Ion Storm working on Daikatana. Definitely had those moments. Gearbox working on some of those projects. So yeah, I definitely remember a lot of things.
What was it bad when you were working on Halo, or was that a good time? Like,
Halo was a really fun project, and I think it also had a lot to do with the people I was working with. Really enjoyed working with all the guys in the box. And Halo was probably, I would say Jayhawk and Halo were the funnest projects there, just because of the team. It was early in the studio's lifetime. We were still kind of scrappy. And communicate with each other, and there wasn't like a lot of that whole management thing.
Okay, so there's no hierarchy.
Not really, no, not at all. And I think like the only hierarchy you had on Halo was that you had to split into two teams, platform teams. There was the network team, just because the network. A big project. Those guys basically rewrote all the networking. So.
Wow. So you did realize the gravity of what you were working on when you were working on the Halo port.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah. That was great. Yeah.
Yeah.
We were really excited with it. Microsoft. I don't really know the details of why they pitched us on it originally, because at the time we were working on a project for them, and they were just kind of like funding a first playable for a project. So at the same time they're like, hey, we've got Halo, you guys want to give it a shot? And of course me, like, I'm all about problem solving and doing fun stuff. and ports at the time were kind of my thing. Like, you know, I just had to be really good at porting stuff. Like we had just come off Tony Hawk, and you know, it was me, another engineer that